So Benson Varghese, managing partner of Varghese Summersett, and I am
Anna Summersett, co-founder, partner, wife.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that last part. That's the most important. But this podcast is called Tapped In, which mirrors the book you wrote on lessons for law firm growth. Is that like a flex or is it more of a roadmap?
You know, over the years, we've gotten the question of how did your firm become what it is? And we got that at 2 years in, 5 years in, 10 years in. And so those thoughts kind of became compiled and put into this book.
So you would say it's more of a roadmap for other people to follow?
It's a roadmap.
Okay, awesome. So you really didn't come from generational wealth or even like a legal legacy. I mean, you're the first lawyer in your family, right?
Yeah, quite the opposite. When I went to law school, I had not met a single lawyer. We grew up very poor. I was born in India. We didn't have any of the things that you would expect someone in the Western world to have, including oftentimes running water, power, plaster on the walls. So we came up from very little. My parents, of course, came to the United States, worked really hard to get me through college and law school, and I'm the beneficiary of all their efforts. But yeah, very different than having generational legal scholars in our family.
So then, kind of give us the Cliff Notes version of how you got from there to here, an 8-figure firm, named one of the top 500 most influential people in Fort Worth, numerous other awards that I won't bore the audience with. But why does your opinion on this subject matter? Kind of walk us through that.
Well, I would say my perspective is unique, whether some think my opinion matters or not. And that perspective comes from where I came from and certainly my life experiences. As I alluded to, I was born in India, although my journey was somewhat convoluted. So when I was about a year old, my parents moved us to the United States. And, we were essentially a first-generation family. But by 5th grade, my parents had seen enough of my wayward behavior to be concerned about the trajectory of my life. And of course,
Wait, hold on. What is some of the wayward behavior? I think we need to flesh that out a little bit.
Well, you have to see this through the lens of my parents, who were folks who had grown up in India. And so when they saw me getting in fights at school, they were pretty alarmed, right? That was not the norm for kids in India. I'm sure I was disrespectful. There were a couple of times my parents threatened to send me to juvie, and that didn't straighten me out. So it was enough for them to be concerned. I don't know if an American parent would have been equally concerned. But
I think as an American parent, I would be concerned that if one of our 3 boys was assaulting people on the playground.
Well, they shipped me back home, as it were, to get straightened out. And I guess that worked because I came back after high school. I ultimately went to SMU for undergrad and Texas Tech for law school. But while I was in India, I spent time on a rubber plantation where by 10th, 11th, 12th grade, I was entrusted with running the operations of the plantation. And I ran it into the ground, as I talk about in the book. And my parents gave me the opportunity to learn from my mistakes. So I was allowed to make some mistakes at a young age, and that allowed me to avoid those mistakes when I started the firm. When I became an attorney, I worked at the DA's office, and the DA's office attracts A players, but there are some downsides to that environment, which I saw and I learned to avoid when I started the law firm. So I didn't believe in an environment where the only way to get up was to, trample over other people on your way up the career ladder, or a place where drama was just the norm. So learning from places I've been and experiences that I've had really helped me look at the law firm differently from day one. Well,
I want to backtrack into something you were talking about your time in India on the rubber plantation. First, that's where this title comes from Tapped In.
Exactly.
Right? And explain to me what that means.
So rubber trees are tapped, and it's always interesting to talk about the rubber plantation because most people have never thought about where rubber comes from. And today, of course, probably 98% of rubber is manufactured, but there's natural rubber that's still used for certain products, and natural rubber comes from a tree. So you tap the rubber tree, and the rubber tree releases latex, liquid latex that forms, and you gather in either coconut shells, or if you're affluent, plastic shells that you take back. You'll tap approximately 100 trees a morning and take that latex back to add chemicals to turn into solid rubber sheets that are dried and sold. But
so all that to say, it's a laborious process.
It's a very labor-intensive process.
And earlier when you were talking about how some of these lessons you learned on the rubber plantation and the mistakes you made really helped you to avoid those or similar mistakes in the future. But it sounds like through the work that you were doing, like the tactile work with your hands and learning how to run a business, was much more about character building and becoming the man that you are. How much of your success do you think is attributable to that character as opposed to what you do? So who you are versus the decisions you make.
There were a couple of things that came out of that experience. One, I would say, is perseverance. And so the ability to say that, yes, life can get tough and occasionally you'll make the wrong decision, but you can overcome those decisions if you'll just stay at it and be willing to learn. And those are things that I had to do. The other thing is living in India and without the creature comforts that we have in the United States and seeing failure firsthand, I feel a great freedom in that I know I can overcome. And there's not going to be a circumstance in my life that is likely to ever be that difficult. And even if it were, the fact that I was able to get through some tough years makes me believe that whatever life can throw my way, I'll be able to face head on. And that's kind of the freedom I talk about entrepreneurs needing and developing in the book. Is you have to go into the practice of law, particularly if you're starting a firm, without the fear of failure. Because at the end of the day, you have a bar card. You are a lawyer. So if God's given you the ability to think and use the skills that you developed in law school, you are not going to be homeless. You're not going to be penniless. If your firm goes bust, you will still be able to find a job somewhere. So when you go into the entrepreneurial side of running a law firm, go in without fear.
Okay, so you kind of expressed a little bit there that your lack of fear kind of allows you to take certain risks, knowing that you have this safeguard of your bar card, or for you, the safeguard of you've already been to kind of the lowest of the low, poverty-ridden, childhood, extremely difficult work circumstances. For those of us who don't have that experience, okay, let's use your wife as an example. Privileged, upper middle class, always had everything that I needed or I wanted. And I think you would agree, like, I am much more risk averse than you are. So if you don't have that character trait naturally, how would you go about kind of pushing yourself or pushing your boundaries to develop it?
Well, that's what I think I'm going to love about this podcast, is to talk about how we see things differently and are still able to find a pathway forward. So,
you mean we see things differently?
Seems like all the time.
Most things.
Yeah. When I'm trying to talk to you about risk, for example, I'm going to put it in hopefully terms that are based in reason and there's a good rationale for. So to use my example of you have a bar card, to me, that's grounding it in something that is fact. At the end of the day, you know this. And as you and I have talked about very early on, we've both been prosecutors. And although this is risky to step out on your own, there's not going to come a day where you won't be a great trial attorney who couldn't find a job doing something that you, quite frankly, love doing. Right?
I mean, maybe not if we call it like a toxic work environment, but yeah.
Well, I think you would put up with the downsides of a job and even a DA's office if it came down to this is what I've got to do to support my family. And that's just the rational freedom. It's not just a feeling. It's anchored in the knowledge that you will make it.
Well, I love the supposition that you think I think or act rationally, but I'll accept that as an example of how we could all, work on that character trait, knowing that we have that safeguard of our bar card. Because I tend to agree, yes, lawyers are generally speaking employable. So when you talk a little bit about your risk-taking nature, kind of formed by those years in India and the work that you had to do and the number of times your family had to bail you out of running the plantation into the ground, ultimately leading to the success of it becoming profitable, what is something you did early in your career? Whether it be the transition from the district attorney's office or in the early years of the law firm that other attorneys would consider reckless?
From the outside looking in, there may have been things that seemed reckless. So, for example, when I left the DA's office, many people told me, hey, the good times are behind us. It's going to be hard to get out there and make something of yourself. Texas has gone through tort reform. It's not like you're going to make it in the PI space. It's just tough. And so to some, it seemed pretty reckless that I would go out on my own to start a law firm. In other words, not go to an established criminal defense attorney and say, I'd like to come work for you. Let me put in a few years and then establish myself. The reality was I'd spent a year with you planning what this law firm was going to look like. And I was willing to learn. Some may have considered some of the things that I did up front in the moment to have been a waste of time. And I'll give you an example of that. I spent a lot of time self-learning SEO because 11 years ago, I could see, one, the market was really changing from the traditional, hey, every case is going to come in by referral or through the yellow pages of all things, that where you placed organically when someone searched for you on Google was going to matter. So I created content. I learned to optimize the website. Those aren't things that traditionally a lawyer thinks about doing, particularly on the SEO side. But at the time, I knew that was necessary to distinguish myself.
Well, they would be things that traditionally a firm would outsource, right, and find a contractor for or a vendor for, assuming at the time you didn't have the money to do that.
Absolutely.
Right, so you had to be self-taught.
Absolutely. I didn't have the money. I had the time, and I decided to spend the hours after the normal 8 to 5 to work on things like content creation and learning SEO so that we could get the phone to ring. Some may have thought of that expenditure of time as either reckless or not worth it in the long run, but that's what gave us the foundation to build upon.
You talk about, some of the things that other attorneys would have considered reckless. Were there people who doubted you when you made the decision to leave the district attorney's office and start your own firm?
Absolutely. Not because they disliked me by any stretch, but because the business side of things was completely untested. There was no precedent for what I was doing. Even today, I look at the large firms in our geographic area, and I can't see another firm that at the 11-year mark has accomplished what we've accomplished at the 11-year mark. So from day one, we've really been unprecedented. So yes, there were people that doubted me at the beginning because what could they look at to say, well, based on what's happened in XYZ, we expect you will do the same or at least nearly as well?
Well, because at the time that you left the DA's office and started the firm, is it fair to say that the majority of the legal community in criminal work at that time were solo practitioners or like non-partnered office share situations?
That's right. There were very few firms, true firms, that were in this space, and the ones that were really volume practices. They were not known for the quality of their service or their results.
So let me kind of flip that around. Was there anybody who came alongside you and either mentored you through that transition or kind of gave you a hand up and said, yeah, actually, you can do this?
Well, I'm married to her. I don't know. I don't know if I had a professional mentor, and that's
Well, and at the time, we weren't married.
That's right.
We were dating.
That's
I think
right.
my parents threw an absolute conniption fit.
Yeah.
When I told them I was going to go out and go into business with a man that was not my betrothed. It was like a marriage of professional careers of sorts before we had made that decision personally.
That's right. And to make matters worse, we were dating off and on. But what we knew...
Do they need to know that?
Well, what we knew, my point of that being, regardless of whether we were dating or not, we always worked well together. And we've tried cases together. And coming into the firm, we were undefeated as a trial team. So I think we both had the confidence of, yes, we like each other, but we also know we can work well together. And the fact that we think so differently has helped us in trial and has ultimately helped us as business owners.
Well, and working well together, just to be fair, doesn't come without its challenges, right? I mean, we see things very differently, and it's almost sometimes that like clash of the titans situation that like sharpens us to improve.
I'm thinking of another couple friend of ours that also owns a law firm, and they are so pleasant all the time. And I am not
Greg and Jacqueline?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, they're so sweet.
I am not going to pretend that our conversations are not passionate and heated when we, which is often the case, disagree. But it's always fair to also say we both know we have each other's best interests at heart, and we come to a resolution that hopefully both of us agree with or can live with.
We agree that you make the final decision, I think. But yeah, I mean, and underpinned by the, lifelong commitment, right? Because when we think about the firm, you have this long game kind of mentality. Like every play or every vision that you have for the company is years, sometimes decades away. Whereas I, on the other hand, am much more in the now. Like, what is happening now? How do we accomplish these things? How has that like push-pull, if you will, affected the trajectory of the firm?
If I can start with first, whether you ultimately end up marrying a partner at your firm or not, having someone who you can trust implicitly it makes the world of difference. And so that's our starting point, is no matter what, we both know that we're ultimately rowing in the same direction, that we want the best. And I encourage you to find that in your leadership and develop that in your leadership. Right. And there have to be a lot of candid conversations, a lot of candor, a lot of willingness to step on toes, but to address that honestly in order for you to have that kind of relationship. But once you have that kind of relationship, yes, absolutely. The push and pull between us has worked out well. And it's almost often the case that you see things one way, you're a quick start by nature, and immediacy, getting to the result right now, taking action right now is very important to you. And I very much think it's my job to take care of the long-term, not just vision of the firm, but doing things to ensure growth, to ensure the phone's going to ring not just tomorrow, but a month from now and 6 months from now and a year from now. So you need that within the firm. You don't want your leadership to all think the same way or always agree on everything. The challenge is good, and I think it pushes us further faster. Yeah,
so the takeaway isn't you have to marry your law partner, right, to get that level of commitment or even alignment. But I think the part that you hit on that I think is probably most interesting is that having that candor, like having that radical candor, so to speak, where you can be very honest with someone when you're discussing kind of the progression of the firm or the steps that it's going to take to get there. And in order to have that type of candor with someone, there has to be absolute trust that you guys are aligned and that you're rowing in the same direction. And so I think we benefit, from being married and already having that as a foundation. But certainly that's something that other law firm owners and their partners can look to as a way to develop like a skill set or a communication pattern. So do you have a first real win for the firm that you kind of look back to and you think, this is when I knew like we were going to make something really special?
Well, when I think about first, I always think about my first client, who of course I won't name, but was referred to me on a driving while intoxicated case. And it was actually referred to me by a good friend of yours, another attorney who's situated several hundred miles from us, but still in Texas, and someone we think of very highly. So between being the very first case that ever hired me and being a personal referral, getting to an excellent outcome on that case has meant the world to me. My first client to this day does not know he was my first client, because why would I tell him that? He would lose all confidence in me. He's someone I've kept in touch with, not because he was my first client necessarily, but because he has a business that we were ultimately able to use as the firm. He's a craftsman, and we purchase things that he makes. And it brings me a special satisfaction to know that this is a person that I've helped out. He's since gotten married. He has built this business. They're both people him and his wife, who I met during the consultation process, are both people I would still think of as friends, and they run the business together. So she's the one that replies to the emails, and he's the one that creates the product. And it's a special first for me.
So it's interesting with that first client being a referral from a professional and personal friend of mine. I imagine that your standard that you set for client service was kind of driven off of that first interaction.
Since day one, we have talked about providing not just an exceptional level of service, but we're always asking ourselves the question of, if this were a family member, how would I represent them? And so this is as close as it comes for a first client. And yes, that first client and how we provided both the results and the service to that client helped shape where we ultimately went.
I mean, would you say that when you were starting the firm and kind of coming to terms with what it would look like, and how do you separate yourself from the solo practitioners or the office share, criminal defense attorneys that were out there, I imagine that you looked at what they were doing and realized you have to do something different.
So when I set out to start my firm, I could see there were great attorneys in the defense bar. But what I could also see is that most people, if not everyone, were thinking about results. So you could go to a top attorney, and that attorney would be singularly focused on getting you to a certain result. No one was talking about, certainly nothing I heard about, indicated conversation around what's the journey like. And early on...
You mean the journey to the result?
The journey to the result.
For the client.
Absolutely. What was a client journey like? And early on, I was surprised when people would call me. They'd either had attorneys in the past or they were switching attorneys to hire me. That one of the things they were saying is, look, no one's taken the time to ever talk to me the way that you talk to me, to just sit down, understand my problem, walk me through it, and then walk me through the next steps you were going to take. So I understood that when we talk about treating clients like family, it wasn't just about the result. It was about the journey as well. And focusing on that journey was something that I decided to do that was different and has made us different. It's defined who we are.
So, you talk about having this intentional client journey and understanding that the type of communication, and sometimes over years long of a client-attorney relationship, how every point of contact in that journey becomes ultimately as important, if sometimes not more important, than what the ultimate result is, right? Like you can end up with a client who has a great result, but the journey to get there was terrible. They no longer trust you. They no longer value you. And now that result doesn't mean anything to them, right?
So, of course, we started in criminal law, but I think this applies to all practice areas, certainly all the practice areas at our firm. There are periods where, either due to the lack of court settings or opposing counsel not budging on their offer or counteroffer, that it seems like nothing is happening. And it's very easy for clients to be left in the dark, not because the attorney is intentionally leaving them in the dark, but instead because there's no communication. So on the front end, telling a client, this is the journey we expect to have. There will be periods of inaction. I don't want you to be frustrated. I'm still going to check in with you every 2 weeks or monthly, depending on what your firm is doing. But the client knows that there's communication, that I'm going to expect there could be some periods of time where on the outside looking in, it seems like nothing's happening, but that my attorney is making efforts to make sure this case gets resolved timely, but more importantly, in the fashion that it should be resolved. And I'll always tell my clients there are decisions they get to make. I will let them make the decisions that are their decisions. I'll always inform them of what's going on, but it will never be my recommendation to sacrifice an outcome for time, unless timing is just that important for them. We've talked through it and that's their decision. But having those conversations makes such a great impact on the client. The other thing is now we can use technology to enhance our communication. So when I talk about weekly, biweekly, or monthly touch points, if the touch point is going to be, hey, just touching base with you, do you have any questions? Nothing has happened since we last talked, but I just wanted to make sure you're either getting the treatment you need, you're getting the counseling you need. Those touch points can be automated through software. And even if you're not automating them, they can be set up on recurring schedules where someone on your team knows to reach out. And this should be used to augment the personal outreach, not substitute.
I anticipate at some point you will probably have an entire episode just on client communication or what that client journey looks like. And that is only, really one differentiator that you use to really set, your firm apart. But for those people out there who only know successful Benson, right? They only know you as the 8-figure firm, Varghese, Summersett. I get your ads on my social every day, one of the top attorneys in DFW. For those people who have only known this side of you, what about Benson in that first year would you want them to know or to take away?
So when I started the law firm, not only did I have nothing by way of resources, I was actually in debt. I asked my uncle to lend me $9,000. And I knew that $9,000 had to stretch for overhead, expenses, cost of living until I could make it. So I operated on a shoestring budget. Although we had something that looked nice, it was a office share through one of those companies that lets you lease offices by the day, by the month. And so I was one of the first people in that space. So I got an office right next to the conference room. It looked nice, but it wasn't terribly expensive. I didn't buy any furniture. I used everything that they had. So I kept costs down as much as humanly possible. I put in the sweat equity to get the phone to ring. There were many stressful days, and I didn't have a safety net. So once that $9,000 was up, that was it. I didn't have credit cards I was going to use. I didn't really have a plan for how I was going to make it after that. So it can be done. A more prudent person would have spent a year not just planning, but saying, hey,
saving money.
Hey, I'm not going to live downtown while I'm a prosecutor. I'll, move out to the suburbs and save money and have a bigger safety net and those things. But
do you think it's almost the necessity for you that is a driving factor? Like you talk about having this risk tolerance, but it's almost like you make conscious decisions to stay in that headspace where it's like, I have to make this work because this is all I have left to, like, this is all my runway. Like, it has to work.
When we talk about being unprecedented, what was going through my mind at the time was not making waves. It was just making it. And I say that because in Fort Worth, which is where we started and still home for us, there are no other Vargheses. There are very few people of an Indian descent, unlike Dallas, where you have lots of people who are of Indian descent. So I didn't even know if people would call me. And that was a real candidly, it was a fear of mine. They will see Varghese and they'll think, well, how am I going to relate to him? I think ultimately everything is relational.
Is that why you slapped Summersett up there next to it? Just
that's the only reason I recruited you. That's right. That's right.
It's a very English sounding name.
Indeed.
So, you talk about having to make it. And initially the goal wasn't to be what you are now. Like that wasn't in the game plan. It was just turn a profit, provide for yourself, eventually provide for your family. But over the years, you've made this conscious shift to be in growth mode. And you've read books and you've, been online educating yourself. You've used law firm growth companies to assist you on that journey. Some who were complete trash and fraudsters, for lack of a better term, and others who were worth every bit of their 6-figure fee. But what would you recommend for people in that gap where they don't have the two pennies to rub together to have those types of resources, but they also don't want to rely so heavily on vendors who may not be producing the results that they need? What advice would you give them?
Well, I look at law firm growth companies as really an opportunity to find a coach. Okay. And I wouldn't say I found companies. I found one that over the years has earned my trust and we keep going back to. No secret that that's Chris. But yes, we've been burned by other vendors who claim to be in similar spaces. And certainly I hear on a semi-regular basis attorneys who are being taken by SEO companies, marketing companies, lead gen companies, and even folks who use lead gen on a regular basis tell me they rotate them out every 3 months because the results disappear. So what I would tell an attorney in this space, first addressing, well, what if you don't have the means to go out and get a coach? The opportunity to self-teach is enormous. First of all, the traditional methods of reading. There are great business books out there. There are books that are, as the one next to you, are specifically focused on law firms. YouTube is a great place to find content, particularly when it comes to marketing, when it comes to the growth mindset. There's so much you can take in that really the difficulty of finding resources online is not actually finding it, but filtering it to the voices that you should actually listen to. So when I got into the SEO space, you click on one SEO video, everything on YouTube is now SEO related. And in those 1,000 voices, there's only about 2 or 3 that are worth listening to. And so finding the right resources is really what it boils down to. And that doesn't cost money. It just takes your time, which at the beginning when you don't have money, you have plenty of time. As you progress though, and you have the means, and ultimately the reason I decided to take on a coach is the great efficiencies that come with having a company like Crisp point you in the right direction to say, we've frankly gone through similar growth and we're going to teach you from our growth. We're going to tell you what resources are available that are specific to you. But for me, even more compelling than all of that was the ability to align my entire team, which, yes, as the leader, that's what I should be doing. But I understand my limitations. One of my limitations is I'm not very good at giving the same lesson multiple times or necessarily in multiple formats. And the reality is everyone takes in information differently, right?
Well, first of all, you said, I know my limitations. So that the recognition that you have limitations made me chuckle a little bit. But then you launched into, you struggled to teach something multiple times. What do you mean by that?
If it were up to me, if I were asked how to do something, I would create a Loom video and I would send that to whomever needed the answer because I'm then walking them through and they can see what I'm doing. And I think that's the perfect solution for everything. Well,
because it requires no like person-to-person interaction.
Well, it's just efficient. In one fell swoop, I can show you and tell you, and you can watch it whenever you want to watch it. And you can watch it multiple times, and you can go back and say, oh, I missed what he said there. Let me watch it again. So I think it's incredibly efficient. Well, it turns out not everyone takes in information the same way. So for some people, the back and forth that you're going to have conversationally, where they get to ask the question while you're presenting, while it's top of their mind, helps them retain that information. So I've come to realize I have a limitation in training. I would have imagined, hey, I'm great at communicating. I can teach anyone anything. And perhaps there's something to be said for having more patience, right? To be able to say it 5 times or in 5 different ways. But kind of segueing into a different topic, though, that's what technology allows you to do, is to have some efficiencies, but you don't want to adopt it so much that you're losing the human element.
Well, and it seems to me that when you first talked to me about doing this podcast, that you were trying to fill that gap between when somebody is just starting out or is a few years into their business or is even 20 years into their business and has just made the decision to grow and doesn't have the money to invest in a law firm growth management company, doesn't have the subject matter expertise in business to really cull through all of those resources and edit out and filter out what is actually useful and helpful, who doesn't have the time, right, to sit down and go through all those resources and research what is the best outcome or A/B test the different options. It seems to me that you want to provide that roadmap for free. And in a space where you essentially can create and grow competitors, why would you do that?
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, when we started talking about the idea for a podcast, I thought our conversations are conversations that people would love to have a front row seat to hear.
Not all of them.
To hear what the competing ideas are, and then how we go through the process of selecting. And yes, I certainly want it to be valuable for the listener so that they can say ultimately, hey, there may be 1,000 voices in the law firm growth space, but I'm listening to Benson and Anna because they're there at the helm, figuring it out, and they're open and they're sharing from their experiences. You know, that's what I've always loved about CRISP is they share from their own experiences. That's what we get to do. And frankly, there aren't enough lunch sessions to make up for the need. You ask about growing your competition. I sit down with attorneys in our local bar who are in the same practice areas, and I share with them candidly what I've done. And I don't really hold back because you can say, I believe the water's warm, and everyone can jump in, or this abundance mindset. There are people in need of our services, right? People are getting hurt every day. People are getting arrested every day. They're going through divorce every day. There is no lack of new cases out there. So we can all grow. And ultimately what I think is if we're all committed to becoming better firms, better lawyers, we're raising the bar for service, right? Clients should come to us expecting white glove service. That shouldn't be the exception. It should be the norm. So that's why I do it. I don't really think it's going to hurt me that we all become better.
Well, it sounds a little bit like you want to single-handedly take on changing people's perspective on lawyers and how they expect to interact with lawyers, how they should feel when they go to a law office, how they should feel at the end of the case, how they talk about their lawyer at dinner with their spouse, how they remember their case progression with their lawyer 10 years down the road. And do you think it's a bit of a stretch? I mean, considering that when people are coming to us, they're coming to us with like the biggest problems in their lives. Like they have lost a loved one due to the tragic neglect of somebody else, right? Or they've been accused of doing something absolutely life-changing and horrific. Or their spouse has committed an infidelity and they're looking at splitting up their family. Like, is it too much to say that we can create a healthy space and a healthy relationship between attorneys and their clients without sacrificing results.
Absolutely. And candidly, the answer is even broader than that, because I look at what we are trying to create and trying to raise the bar as not just something that faces the rest of the world, but also what happens within a law firm. Everyone that's come here, that has come here from other places, be it law firms or just other employers, they talk to us about all the things that we have avoided creating here, the drama, the issues that affected their quality of life, the lack of respect. Again, I don't think we should be the exception. I think by raising the standard for everyone, that becomes the norm. And yes, absolutely. I chuckle when I think about when I was a kid, there were Aggie jokes told all the time. I'm not familiar.
You be careful. This is like Fort Worth.
Well,
we got the A&M Law School here.
My point is, no one tells Aggie jokes today, right? They used to be the brunt of jokes when I was a kid. It never comes up. I haven't heard an Aggie joke in 20 years. And it took the right decision every day to create a culture where they were no longer the brunt of jokes. That's what we can do. And if for that, there is precedent, right? You can change people's opinion about something as large as an industry.
Well, and this could be like a safe podcast where we only say PC things, but let's assume for the sake of argument, it's not. And we're having this conversation about raising the bar, and you want to teach other people in your legal community what you've done, how you've done it, what's been successful, in hopes that everybody will level up. But aren't there people you want to put out of business too?
There are not people that I want to put out of business. There are practices that I don't want to see continue, right? We sometimes use the general phrase of volume businesses, where the client just becomes a number and the client doesn't get the attention they deserve. The case doesn't get the attention they deserve. I would love to see that go away. Absolutely. I think if we are going to take on a position of trust as an industry, it has to come from genuine care, right? People oftentimes make attorney jokes because there's some underlying truth there. They feel like they've paid a lot of money for either something they could have done themselves or just exists because there are all these complicated laws that are already something they have to struggle with. Absolutely. I think we can get rid of practices that tarnish our image.
Well, and when you say practices, you're really talking about behaviors.
Absolutely.
Or decisions made by attorneys or law firms culturally, not like practice areas.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, the end result is the same, is it not? That if because of your success and you encourage and help others obtain that type of success by using the same playbook, by treating clients well, by focusing on that client journey, by taking care of employees, by cultivating a culture that matters and that protects, that for people, whether because of profit or because of principle, decide not to engage in leveling up that practice, the end result could be they are no longer in business, right? I mean, that ultimately that the legal community is run and controlled by ideally people who are making sound, ethical, responsible, compassionate decisions on behalf of their clients and on behalf of their staff.
Yep, absolutely. They say rising tides raise all ships, but I suppose if you have a whole...
you say that a lot, but like who where does that come from? Like who says that?
But if you have a hole in your ship, you're not gonna make it. So yes, there will be some that can't rise to the occasion, as it were.
Well, give us a little preview, if you will, into some of the topics that people can expect out of this podcast.
Well, what's been on my mind recently is a topic where you and I have different positions, and that is, do you hire slow and fire fast, or do you invest in people, pivot them, and continue to give them opportunities to find out if there's a good fit for them within your firm? So that's an example of something that I think we both have compelling arguments for and against, and hashing that out in front of our audience would be something that I think people will be able to draw from and glean their own insights from. But that's the hope, is we talk about things that are coming up or have come up in our law firm that other law firm owners are inevitably going to face, so that they can look at it and say, well, I have some insight into this.
Yeah. So hiring, firing, team culture.
Absolutely.
Law firm operations.
The
marketing,
use of technology amongst different generations.
Well, and amongst, different willingness to learn new technology, right? Because integration into tech is the difficult hurdle, I think, for most people, as you can see in our working relationship, has been a big one. So technology, we're going to talk about marketing.
Change in general. I think that's something that law firms face, both internal and external change. And how do you respond to that? And what are your expectations for your people, knowing that we're in an ever-changing environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, if there is something a firm owner is going through, struggle, they're having a question that they have, they can always, drop it in the comments, and it's something that we can discuss on air, whether it's something we've been through or something we've had, a colleague go through, and just kind of walk through it. I think at the end of the day, for this, yes, to a certain extent, it is a roadmap of how you got here, and how there are certain things that inevitably, if you put in the sweat equity and you work hard and you do, that you can achieve, right? And it's going to help people kind of shortcut some of those mistakes or struggles that a lot of law firm owners go through. But part of it is really just going to be an open dialogue about what our experiences has been in working together through some of the big kind of buckets that business owners struggle with, and offer up some potential solutions that people can take home, take back to their companies.
Absolutely. That's the idea.
All right. Well, that's it. Episode 1 tapped in.
And that's a wrap.